Currently, TDS has a bunch of towers that spawn units along the path, ranging from crooks, tanks, and literal exoskeletons. Now, most of these units have very different stats from each other, so in this video, I'll be going through all of these towers and decide which one I think is the best. I will be judging them by looking at their crowd control, single target, ram damage and consistency, and after that give them a rating of 0 to 10 red top hats. But please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, it helps me out a lot and I greatly appreciate your support. First off, there's the Crook Boss. This tower costs $600 to place with free DPS. It spawns in pistol goons every 50 seconds, which also deal an additional free DPS. At max level for a total price of $26,000, it has 140 DPS. It also spawns in 2 pistol goons at a time along with Tommy Crooks, which adds an additional 84 DPS. By itself, this tower doesn't have great crowd control, however, if you stack up its units, it can do very well against crowds. Same goes for single target, however, even without its units, this tower can still perform well against singular enemies. However, the units don't have great ram damage, but their great DPS makes up for it. In fact, despite the pistol goons having low health, their ram damage can be useful in the early game. Not to mention, all the units along with the Crook Boss have hidden detection. They also have flying detection except for the Tommy Crooks. With that being said, I think this tower is very good for a beginner tower. It does a very good job for the early and mid game, so I'm giving it 7 out of 10 red top hats. The only problem with this tower is that it falls off in the late game. Next up, there's the Golden Crook Boss. This tower costs $800 to place with 4.4 DPS. It also spawns in pistol goons, but they're now golden, dealing 5 DPS instead. At max level for a total price of $38,000, it deals 185 DPS, which isn't a huge improvement. But it now spawns in golden Tommy goons, which deal 111 DPS. When it comes to crowd control, this tower is very similar to its normal counterpart. However, because of the units dealing a lot more damage, then crowd control will be even better. But you do still need to stack up the units for good crowd control. The single target is also a lot better. The Golden Crook Boss's improved damage does very well against single target enemies. The ram damage is also better. The pistol goons have more health, so they're even better for the early game. But the golden Tommy goons are still not very good for ram damage. In general, this tower is a lot more consistent than the normal Crook Boss. It performs very well throughout the entire game, which makes it a lot more usable. With that being said, I think this tower is very good. Despite it being more expensive, the extra damage the golden perk gives helps out very much, so I'm giving it 9 out of 10 red top hats. This tower just remains good throughout the entire game, which is very nice. Next up, there's the military base. This tower costs $400 to place and it spawns in 30 HP Humvees. These Humvees aren't that great for the early game, as they're pretty weak and take a long time to spawn. However, if you get level 1, they spawn in every 35 seconds instead of every 50 seconds. At level 3 for $2,600, the Humvees now have a mounted gunner on them, dealing 14 DPS with hidden detection. The units slow down while shooting, so now they won't reach the end of the map as quickly. At level 4 for $10,600, it now spawns in tanks, which have 500 health and deal 68 DPS with 40 splash damage. It also now unlocks the airstrike ability, which costs $500 to use and deals 450 splash damage. At level 5 for $34,600, it now spawns in railgun tanks with 1,500 health, 180 DPS, 80 splash damage, and the airstrike now deals 750 splash damage. The units have good crowd control. They have a lot of health, which means their ram damage is great, but the airstrikes are far better for crowd control. The single target is even better. The tanks have great single target DPS and the airstrikes are also usable for singular enemies. But when it comes to consistency, this tower is very inconsistent. The units spawn at random times and shouldn't be relied on for DPS. This is also why it's not that good for main early defense. It's also very map dependent because the longer the path, the better for the units. So if you're bringing this tower, be sure to pick a long map. With that being said, I think this tower is very good. It's a bit expensive to max out, but the airstrikes really make this tower great, so I'm giving it 8 out of 10 red top hats. It's a good tower, but it's easy to overinvest into it. Next up, there's the Mercenary base. This tower costs $2,000 to place and it spawns in multiple different units as you upgrade it. It also gives a 20% damage buff at max level, which makes it usable as a support tower. The different units that this tower spawns are the Grenadier, Right Guard, Rifleman, and Field Medic. The Grenadier deals 80 DPS and splash damage with 300 health. The Riot Guard deals 50 ram DPS while having 2,500 health. The Rifleman deals 61 DPS while having 250 health. The Field Medic, however, is very unique. The Field Medic spawns force fields around up to 8 different units, and these force fields protect the units from any attacks, but they break in order to protect the units. In other words, they are very similar to the sentry shields from the Engineer. Field Medics also cannot protect each other, so they will get affected by the stuns either way. The force field also heals units by 48 HP per second, so if a unit is damaged, then the Field Medic can help. By the way, all of the units spawn from the tower itself and not from the base. However, this tower also has a special ability after level 5, which lets you spawn in units anywhere on the map for $2,500. If you want both crowd control and single target DPS, then the Grenadier is better than the Rifleman in both health and DPS. It deals splash damage as well, so this tower is good for single target and crowd control. However, the Grenadier doesn't have hidden or flying detection, but the Rifleman has both. But that shouldn't be a problem in the late game anyways. But if you want the most single target DPS possible, then just use the Right Guard paired with the Field Medic. The Right Guard has a lot of ram damage and health, so if you spam it with the ability, then you're able to deal some serious DPS. The Right Guard does also work for crowds, but it depends on the enemy's health. Also, I forgot to mention that all units despawn after a while, so even if you stack them up, they won't all be there forever. Also, this tower has a placement limit of 3, so you cannot spam it. With that being said, I think this tower is very good. The units are very powerful if you use them correctly, and the damage buff this tower gives helps out very much, so I'm giving it 9 out of 10 red top hats. The only problem with this tower is that the Rifleman could be better. Next up, there's the Elf Camp. This tower spawns multiple units at the same time as you upgrade it as well. It costs $300 to place and spawns in 8 HP elves every 15 seconds. You're able to get 2 on the first wave, but it's not really good for the early game. If you get level 2 though, snowball elves start to spawn, which are somewhat better in the early game. On level 3, then bomber elves start to spawn, which explode upon impact, dealing 35 damage. If you ask me, I think that's pretty good. On level 4, now Guardian Elves start to spawn, which deal 30 DPS with their sword, along with Cannoneer Elves, which deal 80 DPS with their cannons. At max level, now Ripped Elves start to spawn, which deal 140 splash damage with 800 health, which is very good. Also, Gunner Elves replace the Cannoneer Elves, which deal 16 DPS. It may seem little, but if you stack them up, then they can become very good. And Gift Bombers also spawn, which just throw present bombs onto the enemies, which deal 40 damage. However, they're only really useful for weaker enemies. Even though this unit flies, it cannot ram into flying enemies. Now I do think that the Elf Camp is pretty weak in the earlier levels, but 2 max Elf Camps can be amazing for providing sub DPS for crowd control. They're also incredibly cheap to max out, only costing $15,000, which makes it easy to get 2 max Elf Camps pretty quickly. Unfortunately, you cannot get more than 2 Elf Camps because of its placement limit, but I think the Elf Camp is not the best for single target. The unit's ram damage can be used for single target, but even then I think they are best for crowd control when spammed. Even if the units are weaker, this tower is far more consistent than any other spawner tower because of the units spawning in very often, which is a very big advantage that this tower has. Because of that, this tower also doesn't need a very large map. With that being said, I think this tower is super good for how cheap it is. It provides very good sub DPS and it's useful in a lot of modes, so I'm giving it 7.5 out of 10 red top hats. This tower is easily replaceable, which is why I'm not giving it a very high ranking. Next up, we have the Necromancer. It costs $1,600 to place. This tower attacks enemies with magic while collecting souls, and gaining the ability to summon multiple skeletons around it the more you upgrade it. All levels before max level are awful, so I wouldn't recommend using lower levels of this tower. On level 3 for $13,000, it deals 26 DPS and only really hits one enemy even though it has piercing. Its skeletons aren't that great on level 3 either, so I'm just gonna talk about max level. It costs $43,000 to max out while having 65 DPS. It may seem little, but it's able to attack up to 7 enemies at once without needing to pierce, which is about 455 DPS. This makes it super good for breakers and even flying enemies sometimes. When its graveyards are upgraded to the max, it spawns in Hallow Guards with 1250 health, Skeleton Knights which deal 50 DPS with their sword and have 100 health, and Executioner Skeletons which deal 125 DPS with their axe and have 3500 health. The summons are completely randomized, so you won't always get Executioner Skeletons since they are pretty rare. However, if you get all 3 Necromancers since it has a placement limit of 3 and gets multiple Executioner Skeletons, then that's a pretty powerful combo. Not to mention that the lightning when summoning units deals 300 splash damage, which can be pretty useful. Also, since the units spawn from the Necromancer, enemies can easily walk past it, making spawning your units useless. With that being said, I think this tower is alright. I don't like how expensive it is and that it is only good at max level, so I'm giving it 7 out of 10 red top hats. This tower is good, but it isn't mandatory. Also, I did not forget about the monster unit, but I won't be talking about it because it's super overpowered and it's a very rare consumable, so it won't really be fair. But the winner for me is the Golden Crook Boss. This tower is amazing. It works for the early game, mid game and even late game, but for sub DPS. It works for a lot of modes and even events, which makes it very versatile. It also has hidden and flying detections, which makes it even better. I think this tower is worth the 50,000 coins, and if you want to grind for it, I'd say go for it. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed, please like and subscribe and feel free to leave a comment down below. My name is TZ and I thank you for watching.